why I think that I will talk a bit about why I originally never, when I started the channel, I never wanted to ever talk about my personal life or who I was as an individual, because I thought it would distract from the point. But since I've already started to get a little bit into why about my own family and stuff, because I'm showing as a demonstration of how one might go about in their own way, like honoring one's ancestors. And that's why I showed my own personal journey and doing that myself. So already I've revealed some aspects of my personal life, but and I think that even though I don't want to build a cult of personality, I just want to talk about history and spirituality. I think that I agree with Heidegger's view that it's an authentic existence has to accept that you don't build your identity like out of your, like Sartre and the existentialist would say that the authentic identity was all about, shedding off like the trappings of your family and of like cultural conditioning and then building your authentic self. Whereas the real authentic self is your cultural conditioning to a certain extent. It's like your family, your nation, your culture of your social class, the religion that your family has, these kind of things. So it's more like, it does reveal something authentic about my existence to talk about my personal life. But also, I don't agree with this kind of pop culture thing where people try and retroactively look at like a poet or an artist or a musician or anything, or a writer, all kinds of people, a politician even, and then they say something, oh, this thing about that happened in their life and that must be why this X, Y, and Z happened. So they use like a really quite crude form of psychoanalysis, and we all know where that comes from, to try and understand people. So I will just crack on with talking about that, then. I'll just apologize for the technical difficulties that we started off with. Let me see. The weird thing is my super chat thing. I know there was a super chat earlier, but it's not showing in this now in the super chat activity page. So anyway, I'll try and keep an eye on the chat this time, because you guys give me a warning if I mess up the tech again. Now, someone asked, how do I finance my trips? Well, that's not really about my personal life. I was going to go from the beginning, but let me just say something about that. These trips are just work trips. Like I went to India, I had to go for work. I had to go and deliver a talk there. So they paid for me to go out there and go in hotels, everything paid for. And I just used my holiday time to extend that trip for a few days so I could go and film the areas where my family lived, which were like only a couple of hours drive from where I had to go and work anyway. So it was fortuitous I had to go there, because I don't think it was, when I say it was fortuitous, I don't just mean like it was random chance. In my opinion, nothing happens randomly. Like the Sri Lanka thing, I was going there to film a hotel advertisement for a safari hotel, which is why I got all that elephant footage. And of course, it tied in with my ancestor thing. And the Rome thing, I had to go there and deliver a talk for work. And I thought, well, while I'm in Rome, when in Rome, I'll make a film for Survive the Jive. So basically, wherever I have to go in my life, if I've got to go and visit some people for a family engagement or for work, I also used it for Survive the Jive, because I couldn't, otherwise I couldn't have time for Survive the Jive, because I had to make money. And I only started trying to live off Survive the Jive just now, this year. So I was just building up like as a secondary income, Survive the Jive. So eventually I could not have to do working for making for other people. And the kind of things I do for other people are similar to Survive the Jive in skill set. I make videos. I show people how to, I help people with communication, like teaching them to communicate ideas and concepts through to a larger audience in a way that makes it easier for them to understand, and science communications and stuff like that. And I use video and social media as a means to do that. But I really would just rather work with more of my own projects. But we'll see how it goes. That's why I'm branching out into merchandise as well, because I wouldn't be able to live off this otherwise. So, and I want to make more content. People always said, why don't you make very many Survive the Jive videos? Sometimes I was doing in the old days like one a month. That's all I could get to do. But if I'm doing this as a job, I can do several a week maybe, or something like that. But we'll see how things play out with this. So yeah, in short, I never pay for these trips. Other people pay for them for me. Like, yeah. Otherwise, like, obviously, I don't have enough money to pay to go to India just randomly to make a film for Survivor Jive. So talking about myself, I grew up in rural England. I was raised in Surrey mainly for the first part of my life, Surrey and Sussex, which is in the home counties. And the weird thing about that is, what some people from other countries might understand, is the weird distinction between London and the suburbs of London, which are sometimes quite horrible. And then suddenly, just not that far away from that, you get into a completely different world. And the countryside, the English countryside, the home counties, where you get like old cottages and pubs, hundreds of years old, and little villages named after Thor and things like that. That's where I grew up, near a village called Thursley, actually, which is named after Thunor. Then I went to my family are not Catholic, actually. My father's family is High Church Anglican, so that meant they went to Latin Mass and things, but not Latin Mass for Catholics, Latin Mass for Anglicans, which for Americans that's basically like an Episcopalian, but we in England call it Anglican because it's the Church of England, it's the state church, and it's the Church of the Crown, and it basically holds that the Queen is higher than the Pope, and that national sovereignty is above all. We will never, hold a foreign power above our own native monarchy. But and my mother had some Irish ancestry, and we didn't have, both of my mother and father and many generations before, privately educated, privileged castes, but we didn't have that much money at that time. So I couldn't go, I wasn't privately educated. A lot of people think I am because of the way I speak, and that's just because my family has always been privately educated, but I wasn't. And the combination of my mother coming from partially Catholic background and the fact that one of the best state-funded local school was a Catholic school, they decided to have me sent to Catholic school. So I was raised Catholic for that reason, but I was not from a Catholic family exactly. But I was very rebellious against the Catholic schooling, and I was in trouble a lot as a child. I refused to worship the donkey at Christmas. I remember in the nativity play once I had to be Joseph, and I found Joseph to be an objectionable character. I thought he was weak and girly, and that he was, I didn't understand why he was walking with Mary, because she was carrying someone else's child. And the Mary urinated on stage next to me because she was so nervous. And I remember the teachers shouting at me when this girl urinated on the stage. I didn't do anything. She just pissed herself. But because they knew that they felt that I was like a presence that caused like fear for her or something. So I remember that was an instructive. It must have been like 6 or 7 years old or something like that, but I can't, 7 or 8 maybe. And the time that I refused to worship the donkey in the song, I said I didn't like donkeys. I don't think they're noble beasts. And I still hold that true today. The donkey is an ignoble beast, I think. And I drew a picture of the donkey defecating on the Virgin Mary, and I was about 8 years old. And then I was in a lot of trouble with some Irish woman screaming at me, saying, this is a Catholic school, blah, blah, blah. But a lot of my friends growing up were Irish because it was a Catholic school, and most English people aren't Catholics. However, later in life, I did discover that a lot of my ancestors were recusants, that they were those Englishmen who refused to convert to Protestantism. And some of them even, I think, of the Fitzherbert family, you can look them up. I'm descended from them. Some of them were quite honored by the Catholic Church because of their refusal to convert, and some of them had moved out to Rome. And obviously the ones that did that didn't actually have children because they, took vows of celibacy or something. But I'm descended from some that did, and obviously stayed in England. And maybe that's something to do with why my family's High Church Anglican, but actually the High Church movement comes from much later after that, actually. The Oxford movement, which some of my ancestors were members, which is a movement within the Anglican Church to restore the old Catholic sorts of rights within the Anglican Church, because it come too low church, too Puritan to appease the peasants, and they wanted to make it a more higher up the candle, with more smells and bells and old medieval forms of English Christianity, rather than this the Reformation, which had been a bit Old Testament, a bit Hebraic. Anyway, I always think of myself as being higher up the candle. If you think of like the low church and the high church, they say higher up the candle. Or I'd say paganism is the highest of the candle of all, because it's the flame. Because we're getting rid of getting rid of the Hebraic origins entirely. But that was only my young part of my life. Later on, I went to a secondary school, which is what you call high school in America, in a different county. That's a different part of the country, not that far away. By American standards, you wouldn't consider it down the street, but in England, driving for 1 hour is a big deal. The accents change, the county changes. It's a different place entirely. So this was about 2 hours drive. So it was on the Berkshire-Oxfordshire border, and that's the region that I covered in the beginning of the film, From Ruins to Ruins, because the burial mounds around that part of the country were important to me growing up. Even I wasn't a pagan at that time, but I was very, involved in the landscape of the English countryside. It was formative in for my identity, and I used to camp outside a lot with my friends. We used to go camping, because growing up in the countryside, a young boy, you can't go in the pubs. They don't like kids coming in because they get in trouble, and you can't drive, you can't go anywhere. So you just go out into the country and find ways to be a nuisance for farmers and things like that, steal fruit, or I don't know, camp and find a way to get alcohol and drink that or whatever. And that was quite the sort of thing that I got up to for most of those years. And I became very identified with, I'm of that generation, early millennial, I guess you'd say, like on the born in the mid-80s. So there was a punk revival at that time, and I became very involved in like the skinhead aesthetic and this kind of culture. I very much like that aspect of punk rock, like the British aspect, because I wanted an authentic sort of youth culture that was for me. Because some people, I noticed like a lot of like my generation, a lot of like the more strong sort of young men who were looking for like virile masculine idols they would like rap music, because that was all sort of macho. And then the more weaker types, they would prefer like emo. But I didn't like either, because I felt like I'm not black, so why should I involve myself in black people's culture? And the emo thing I thought was offensive to me, because I found it effeminate. So I wanted something that was more like, I'm what I am. And there wasn't really a culture, a youth cultural movement at the time that reflected that. So then I looked back into the 80s, and I discovered that there was this a cultural phenomena of like oi punk and things like that. But I really got into it. But the thing is, it wasn't really authentic for me to like that either, because the oi punk movement was very much a working class movement, and I'm not working class, so it was sort of inauthentic. But at least it was English, and it was in that sense it was miles better than liking some Californian emo band or some American rapper. But yeah, I very much like that. And through that, I first came into contact with right-wing people. I met some right-wing people, but I wasn't exactly a right-winger. I was proud to be British, and I've always have been, but I wasn't overtly right-wing in my politics. I just had a kind of instinctive politics, and many of my friends were Marxists. And I think at times I probably identified as a Marxist, even though I rejected a lot of Marxist things. Like I've never, ever, ever opposed Britain. I've always been proud to be Britain, and I've never endorsed the replacement of British people by immigrants, even when I describe myself as a Marxist. My interest in Marxism was basically because I was wanting to understand politics, and in popular culture, and in school, the only political viewpoint that I had access to was Marxism. So the only book I could get hold on was the Communist Manifesto. I think I read the Communist Manifesto when I was 15 years old, and that was my introduction to politics. So I used to be a 15-year-old with Dr. Martens and a short haircut and things like that. But I kind of, I wasn't really a Marxist properly because I didn't go along with it. And I mean, I read some of Das Kapital years later, but I didn't like it, and I came to dislike Marxists. A lot of the Marxists in the local punk scene, I disliked them because I thought they were hypocrites and false. A lot of them were the richest people in the area, and also I thought that they didn't really like working class people anyway. They just pretended to. And also I disliked this fetishization of the other, which I thought was an inauthentic thing. But I kind of liked Marxism in another sense because I disliked politicians. I disliked a lot of the power structures of the time, and I thought of the revolutionary power of Marxism was appealing. There was something romantic about it, especially for a young man. You want the glamour of the violence of revolution is very appealing for a young man, and not knowing of any other forms, Marxism being the only one that was celebrated in popular culture. That was, of course, the one that I came to understand. I didn't have my rebellion against Marxism was, which was instinctive and not with any intellectual foundation, except Marxism, was a bit clumsy. And I tried to use Marxism against itself. Like even when I finally went to university, my first dissertation, I was trying to argue using, even by that point, that introduced me to cultural Marxists, like the Frankfurt School, which you're taught when you learn about any social science. And I studied media in Brighton. So I'll come to that, but basically before I got there, I got kicked out of college, actually, at school, because I was a bit of a tearaway. I was a bit of a problem at school, and they didn't like that I was a skinhead, and a lot of people thought I was a right winger or something like that, or a fascist, even though I didn't see myself like that, or never described myself like that. But they didn't, because I had even before I read 1984, I invented my own little teenage political ideology called English socialism, which would be a form of socialism that would preserve and celebrate English identity, but also had some socialistic elements to it. But then when I read INGSOC is the bad thing in 1984, I realized you can't use that moniker. But I was to cut a long story short, on my 18th birthday, a disaster happened that changed my life. I won't go into it too much. I don't think I can for legal reasons, but suffice to say, I was arrested and kicked out of school. But I did my college degree from home. I taught myself, and I passed. I got an A on both of the things without having a teacher. I didn't need a teacher. I was able to teach myself, and I got into university anyway, even though that I'd been kicked out of college. By the way, in America, you say college. We call what you call college a university in England, and we call a college what college for us is 2 years of intermediary study between the compulsory high school study and your progression to university. So, anyway, having got a place in a university, I moved to Brighton, and my family moved to Italy. My family, by this point, my mother and father had divorced when I was young, and my father had remarried an Italian lady, so of course a Catholic, and so my little sisters are all half Italian, or a quarter of Italian, because this Italian lady is in fact only half Italian herself, so they're a quarter Italian and 3/4 English, and they all moved to Italy and have lived there ever since, and I began my studies, first time living in a city. And the city was Brighton, and that is the most liberal and perverted city probably in all of Britain, except perhaps Amsterdam. I don't know, but I mean all of Europe, sorry, except perhaps Amsterdam. And it's excruciatingly liberal there, and that was actually a wake-up call for me. And I started to sort of more and more resent this sort of thing. And I remember having some outbursts in university where I'd get furious when they'd talk about, where they'd slander the British Empire, or they'd slander the British people, or say this or that, and about white people. I didn't like that. Let me just check comments before I continue, in case there's anything I should. No super chats, so I'll just carry on then. Where is it? Oh. So where was I at? I was talking about the university. So Brighton's a horrible place, but I had fun there. I was in a bands and things, and I was learning about promotion, and I was studying media. So my idea was that politicians didn't have as much power as the media, and that the real power that influenced all culture and therefore all behavior in the West was media. And therefore it made sense. The most logical thing for any young man to do is pursue a career in media if he wants to have any influence in the world. And I did okay in my degree, did pretty well. And then I got some links up afterwards through a piece of luck. My grandfather had been a teacher after he fought in the Second World War. He came back and he became a teacher. And one of the men he taught was now employed at Condé Nast, that's Vogue House, at one of the Vanity Fair. So I managed to, through him, through my then dead grandfather, this link to grab an internship, which is hard to get. I mean, unfortunately, that's how media works. But I got that internship at Vanity Fair, and then I did another one at GQ, and then which is in the same building, and so I got a little step up in the media. But I'd always wanted to be a filmmaker. I never wanted to be a journalist. And my writing, I'd learned to write essays from my university, and essays are horrible to read. They're very boring to read. And I had to relearn to write, basically, learn to write for journalism, because I then went on to do internships at other magazines as well, like Dazed and Confused magazine, which is now owned, and ID magazine, which is owned by Vice. And I used to work with Vice magazine, but they never actually published anything I wrote. But I had I was in communications with the editor in London, and I used to go to their offices sometimes. But they never actually published anything I did. But yeah, I was published in Dazed and Confused and ID and other places, many of the little music magazines. I worked for Peaches Geldof for a bit. I know her. And I also knew that the Jewish husband that she married, I interviewed him in 2008, actually. But among these people, I was really clear. I was never actually able to do anything I'd set out to do by going into media. I was never able to express my opinion. And generally, when people in East London, where I'd lived among all these hipsters and things, when they learned of any of my beliefs, they didn't take kindly to it. And the best reaction with everybody is just ask me not to talk about it so much. So I certainly would never be published. So it was a failure. And also, my original intention was never to be a journalist. It was to be a filmmaker, to make films. But then I got some steady work, actually, and I just worked instead writing blogs for a social media startup. And I got right into the tech industry instead. And I earned a bit of money with that. And by 2011, I had a bit of money. And I thought, I don't like my life. And I was working in this office. And that's when I started Survive the Jive as it is now. So someone's asking now in the chat, how old is Survive the Jive? Well, the word Survive the Jive started in 2007 when I made the blog. And that was just a blog about complaining about the Labour Party and the surveillance card that they proposed. But the channel was even older, but that was just for me to upload whatever random videos I had at the time. It didn't have any direction. But around that time when I was working in this social media company, the startup in London, I was feeling, having grown up in the countryside and now living in a city, big London city, with all this very multicultural, very urban. The air is dirty, the streets are dirty, people are impersonal, and the languages are often foreign, and there's no proper feeling of tie to the land. There's a lot of it's deracinated, it's materialist. and I was feeling very strongly that this was wrong. And it was around that time that I started to have a religious awakening, because I had been abandoned Catholicism during my teenage years for quite, basically quite adolescent reasons. I had seen like, talking snakes in the garden. Come on, like denying the existence of evolution. This stuff was all basic stuff, like kind of Richard Dawkins tier. Like, I can tell that these myths in the Bible aren't literal, and so that the whole thing, I'll throw it out. And and then I claim not to believe in God either. But I don't know if I really, saw the world as purely dead. I thought there might be something. I sometimes maybe was more agnostic or something. But around that time in 2009, I was working at this place. Then I started to make Survivor Jive, a Tumblr blog about it as well, to go with the channel. And the channel started to talk about like Anglo-Saxon runes and old stone circles and things like that. And the Tumblr that went with it was always, I was posting pictures of nature and quotes from traditionalist authors like Julius Evola. Around 10 years ago, I started doing that. And I was using that blog as an escape from my own urban existence, which I hated. And I always was thinking, one day I'm going to get out. And that's what I started to plan to do in 2011. I was like, okay, I got some money now, and I'm interested in Anglo-Saxon paganism. And I converted to paganism around 2009. But I was like, if I'm really serious about paganism, I got to know about paganism, and I've got to devote my life to this if I really believe in it. And I thought, I'm going to go back to university and do a master's degree where I focus specifically on Germanic paganism and learn, actually really get to the grips of it. And then when I finish, I'll become a teacher, and I'll teach other people about this, and I'll help to preserve our heritage and knowledge about this. I'll use what the money I've accumulated to reinvent my life, and also to help other people. But after I did the degree, I was told by Ofsted that a master's degree in history is not relevant to teaching history. That's what they said, because I'd focused on medieval history, and they really just want to talk about the Holocaust and stuff like that. So I was like, I'm not going to do this. I don't want to be a teacher, actually. I changed my mind. I was thinking about learning about how they teach and what they to do, and like, I don't think it was any point. But I remember I had one really good history teacher when I was 10 years old. And I said before, I didn't have a private education, but actually there's one exception to that. For 1 year of my life, they did send me to private school for 1 year when I was 10. And in that place, I had one history teacher, and I don't remember any of the lessons he gave except one, but it's the only lesson from any history teacher I've ever remembered from my entire childhood. And he sat down and just told us off. This guy with a beard, a tweed jacket, and a pipe, smoking a pipe. It didn't give a damn in the private schools. You can do what you like. You can smoke a pipe in front of children. And he said, you don't know what you are. You're all raised on Saturday morning cartoons. You've got no clue what it is to be British. You're all going to be like Americans. You think like Americans. You're raised on American stuff. And the Americans are only jealous of us because they don't have our history. Something along those lines. And I mean, I can't believe I remember this over 20 years later. But it must have had some effect, because I see now that I remember it, and I think he was right. And anyway, I'll never be able to give that lesson in a school if I was to become a teacher, because they would just put me in prison probably nowadays. I don't know what they do, but it's wasted my time. So I thought, you know what? I really originally wanted to be a filmmaker. So I'm going to make a film, and I'm going to use all my learning from what I've just taken from this master's degree about Anglo-Saxon paganism, and I'm going to transfer it into cinematic format. And I had a friend who was a video editor who I'd gone to school with, a good friend of mine, and he said he'd edit the film because he needed some practice anyway, and film it as well. So From Runes to Ruins was the product of that work, which was done we began it in 2012 after I graduated. Originally it was a film I didn't involve him in. I was going to originally have it as a film that I directed, and BBC were going to show it, and I had meetings with the BBC about it, and Richard Rudgley was going to present it, who was a Channel 4 presenter, and he's also published by Arctos now. I recommend his books. He's also a friend of mine. He's a good man. But BBC didn't want Richard Rudgley because he had been on Channel 4, and there's like a conflict between Channel 4 and BBC or something. And then the BBC said they didn't really want to take my documentary anyway, even have Michael Wood do it or anything, because they said there's too much Anglo-Saxon stuff on TV anyway. So I was like, oh, bugger. I spent all this work, like done all the research for this film, and I got into the BBC offices, and they said they were going to run it, and I had like a presenter and all these different things. But then someone at the BBC, a friend of mine who worked at BBC, said, just make it yourself. And that's when I approached my friend who was a film working in video production, and he agreed to do it with me. We did it. It took about a year or so of I started working back in media again to get money while I was doing it. And then I was driving up to Scotland and driving out to these barrows, out of the countryside, out of London into the countryside to make From Ruins to Ruins. And it was finished by the end of 2013. And that was the start of that. And that kind of, I never got anywhere. I got a couple of film festivals to show it, but it didn't get like what I was hoping for it to happen. I think it was a good film, but then I decided, like, I'll just put it as, when I couldn't get anywhere to like take it on in film festivals and stuff, I was thinking this is because the content's not, you know. The only place, one film festival showed it on the Portobello Road, and it was shown after a film about a tranny or some kind of like film about trannies. And I was like, it was really bad. The sound, I'm not just talking about the subject. I mean, like, it was poorly shot. The lighting was bad. The audio was bad, and it was like, this was like the runners-up room for the bad films. And I was like, this isn't fair, because our film was so much higher quality, but it's been lumped in with these really these badly made produced films, because it's just not like, because of the content, they didn't agree with it. Anyway, I thought, I'm just gonna put it on pay-per-view and see what happens. And over the years, it made its money back. So I covered the expenses, and I was able to give I was the main cameraman and director, and also the assistant cameraman, paid back their expenses and a bit more for the costs of the film. So ultimately, it didn't cost us anything to do it. But it didn't make a lot of money. But I mean, what it did is start to get people's attention on the right. And around that time, had been around 2013 and 2012, I got really upset by I was attending the Traditional Britain group, and I was a big fan of Jonathan Bowden, and I really liked him. I thought he was a great speaker and like an intellectual, something like someone on the right who was a bit like me, because he came from Berkshire and I came from Berkshire, and he was saying he was essentially a pagan and I was a pagan, and he was like a man who was interested in culture and the arts, because I'd formerly been an arts correspondent for some magazines, and a music journalist as well. So he was like me, and I was thinking, you know, the right isn't just thugs, it's this balanced character as well. But then he died, and I just realized just how fragile the state of the British right was, that this man was gone and there was no one to fill his boots. And I thought, aren't there other people like that? It's a big country with a high population. Don't we have anyone of that quality? I thought it was selfish of me that I'd never really tried to contribute anything to British patriotic movements. And I never got to even see him live. Someone was asking. I always thought I would. I've been attending the Traditional Britain group, but I didn't go to see, I never saw Bowden speak. Then I went to, then I just started going more. I started attending more events and doing more things, and I lost a lot of my left-wing friends, what were left of them, because they saw me as, they didn't mind that I had these right-wing opinions that I kept them to myself. When they saw me actively mixing with other people who shared them, they didn't like it, and that was the end of that. Lost all my contacts in media then, most of them. And you know, and then I started getting more interest in the channel, though, because From Ruins to Ruins, interest from right-wing people, and you know, you can see the rest is all up there to see. You can see what the rest of my life, how it progressed from there. Like I continued to work in media, helping people, but after From Ruins to Ruins, that was made. I wasn't the one who did all the video work, but since then I've learned to improve my own cinematography, because when I dreamed of being a filmmaker, I didn't think I was going to be a cameraman or an editor. I thought someone else would do that for me and I'd be the grand director vision. But now I realize that was grandiose and arrogant of me. If you want to be a filmmaker, you've got to learn all that yourself now, and you can do it all yourself, and you can always depend on yourself if you want to do that. Traditional Britain Group is listening. Glad to in some way contribute. Well, yes, Traditional Britain Group, thank you. Yeah, it was very important to me that I started networking with other right-wing people at that time, and I still have very close friends from who I met in 2012 as acquaintances, and now I consider close friends who are British patriots and things. But I went on to other stuff, and in 2015 I moved to Sweden, and that was and I've been learning constantly since university. Not just I learned 1 year about paganism and then lived off that. I constantly trying to improve my knowledge about paganism, and my dream of being a filmmaker, and my second dream of trying to educate people about ancestry. I try to film both with the Survivor Jive project. So I'm making videos that I hope to be a little bit artistic, not just me talking to the camera like now, but I really want to make films that are like have atmosphere and cinematic value, but also I want them to be educational, because I want to spread this share this information that I've learned, so that it's helpful for people, particularly British people, but also for foreigners too, if it helps them. Okay, a super chat from Thor Odinson. Being from the USA, I never had a strong connection to my ancestral roots. Your work has been a great influence on my journey to paganism. Thank you. Thank you for saying so. That's exactly what I would hope to hear. I mean, I visited the USA to speak to some people who like my work in December, and I was really, really blown away by how kind they were, how educated, informed, active, just really high quality people, completely, blowing away a lot of the stereotypes that we in Britain often have about American people. But they were really nice and great people there. Do you reckon, and shall I do some, what am I speaking about on Monday? Tomorrow, I am going to speak about landscape. And I think it's going to be a really, really good talk, actually. I say so myself. And it's about how pagans now, and historical pagans, have incorporated aspects of the human landscape, that is man-made things, into their religion and rites and rituals and belief structures and mythologies. And I find it really interesting, actually. I won't go into it too much, because actually I'm going to record the speech and probably upload it anyway. So you can look forward to that yourselves later. Jostein Davison, your work helped me find what I was looking for about my history. Thank you for all you do. Many of us are in the place you were in. Thank you for saying so. And I know that what that was like. Like, I did get out eventually. Like, I mean, my leaving London, I ended up being there. I didn't even think I was going to be there long. I moved there in 2008, the end of 2008. And by 2009, I was dreaming about leaving and saying how it was horrible. But I didn't actually get out of London until 2015. So it's like a trap. Once you get your work and your life and your circle of friends and your income is all connected to the city, it's very hard to break out, because there's not so much employment outside, especially if you have like an urban form of income, like I did working in media. But then I moved to Sweden and I got a quite good job there anyway. So I got by. And then now I live out in rural England, which I absolutely love. It's just really beautiful. This is like the land. I don't live in just anywhere in rural England. I live specifically in an area of rural England where my ancestors on both sides of my family have lived, where I know that in this very village, I have ancestors buried from the 1700s. But in the towns either side of me, there are also ancestors buried from both sides of from my paternal and my maternal lineage. And I know the houses that they lived in. I know where they exactly. I know what jobs they had, and it's all, the area I live in is in the western part of England, where it's it's still very rural and it's still homogeneous. There's not any diversity here, and it's very beautiful. The main industry, therefore, is tourism. And this time of year, it's not so busy, but everyone comes. A lot of Germans and a lot of English people come in the summer for hiking and swimming in the sea. Someone says, can I show you the view out the window? I already did earlier, but I can't do it now because it's nighttime. It got dark, so there's no point. What was your job in Sweden? I already said that. I said I was working in, I made video and communications. Stop drinking beer, start eating placentas. Yeah, it's true, actually. A wise man has said that actually ancient Europeans didn't drink alcohol recreationally. All these, trace amounts of alcohol and brewing evidence, that's all planted there by some subversive elements. It's rather like those creationist Christians who say that dinosaurs, the bones are put there by the devil to trick you or something. Have you ever... Some of these comments, oh dear. Do you like mead? Yes, I do like mead, Jams. Mead is a nice drink, but I don't drink it regularly. I only use it in like ritual context, but as I've said elsewhere, I don't think you have to use mead for ritual context. You could use pretty much any alcoholic beverage, and I think it's more about value, but also on the matter of the meaning of mead. If you want to know more about that, I've made a video about that. So if you look for my video, what is the sacred mead, you can hear me talking at length on that subject. There's some ridiculous comments here. It's true, there are some ridiculous. I'm not even going to read them out, so don't think I will if you type ridiculous nonsense. I got 10 more minutes of this. Maybe I'll go a little bit over since I messed up at the start. But would you advise young people to go to university in the UK or not bother? From Max and Vladi. Well, that's a good question and a difficult one, because I think everyone has established that higher education is over-promoted, and for most people, the result is merely debt and indoctrination. And of course, it would be better for most people who go to uni if they didn't go to university. But that said, of course, there are many, many fields where you cannot possibly progress without a higher education. And it's absurd to say no one should go to university. If you wish to be a geneticist, you must go to university. You must pursue that. If you want to be a doctor, if you want to be anything of this high level, and if you want to seriously want to be a historian, although there are some really, really very talented and knowledgeable autodidacts who have, taught themselves everything they know and have therefore gone on to inform the opinions of scholarly, historical studies. All the same, I think it's much easier for most people, if you want to learn something, to have a master to show you. That's the easiest way of learning. Like anything, of course, it's possible to learn without the help of someone who already knows. But yeah. So yeah, as advice for young people to go to university in the UK, I'd say this: if you want to go to university so that you can earn a living, you want to earn more money later in life, I don't think that's necessary. There are many very lucrative careers that don't require higher education, and you can go straight into it, and all kinds of jobs, like learn a skill. You're much better off learning a skill than going into higher education and getting stuck. Many also academic pursuits only allow you to go into careers in academia. I can say that my media degree isn't the reason I didn't have a very good career in media anyway, but the only reason I got anywhere at all in media was because of connections. The first one I got was through family, and then all the others I made just in pubs, going out at night in London and meeting the right people. But and that's how most things work in life, it's who you know. But as for my history thing, I did my master's degree with the assumption that I wouldn't get a major job in history, but I did think perhaps I could be a school teacher of history. I didn't realize that even that was not possible. However, I paid for it myself, so there was no debt for that. So, I saved that money up for my own job. But yeah, if you You know, there are some people who definitely should go to university, but everyone who goes to university, if you go there, you must be aware, especially if you're not going into STEM fields, but into like the humanities, like I did, you prepare for a barrage of cultural Marxist nonsense and all kinds of subversion and exposure to all sorts of subversive personalities and people. I remember when I was doing my master's at UCL, someone earlier asked what university I went to. My first university was the University of Brighton. My second was University College London. But I also used for study rooms and libraries the SOAS and other colleges in London and King's College. So I was walking around in the university buildings, all of the University of London, not just University College London. And I remember Marxists accosting me in the hallways with Marxist flyers, and I said, no, thank you, I'm not a Marxist, quite politely. And that got their goat, and they started interrogating me as to why I wasn't a Marxist. And that was before I started doing MMA. Maybe that's for the best, but I would perhaps not have been so polite. I might have thought of another way of dispatching them other than a dismissive comment. Anyway, yes, so Mark says, as a historian, be ready to hold and sometimes to put on a mask. I would say not just a historian, but anyone pursuing a career in the humanities. Whatever you're choosing to do, be conscious that you're going to have to blend in, and that many natural perspectives are currently equivalent of being of witchcraft in the Middle Ages. And, you know, be sensible. I got a new son. As a drifting British millennial with little identity, says Sliffwave, paganism intrigues me. Is a simple yearning for identity a good enough reason to get involved? Yes, it's a good enough reason. I mean, the Christians used to say about many paths, you know, that the motivations that led people to become Christian weren't so important to them. Like, they didn't care if it was like a king wanted to become a Christian so he could increase his power. They didn't say, they knew that that wasn't like increasing power and wealth wasn't the meaning of their religion, but they didn't tell him that. They say, as long whatever leads to the end. So I would say actually, like, the main meaning of paganism isn't identity. No religion is centered entirely around just identity politics. That's just you know, that's just a thing that is, you know, a profane concern, but it leads on to that, and that's good. And your desire for identity is legitimate and important, and pursue it by all means. I think that you're doing the right thing, and also I think you're doing the right thing to pursue paganism, but don't necessarily confuse them too much. I mean, you know, paganism can be a component of your British identity, but paganism is ultimately a path to understanding something a bit more than being British, something a bit bigger. I mean, that is, I could say about my own, I was going to talk about my own journey to paganism, but I started getting into it, as I said, in 2009, and I was reading up on, I've got another super chat. If northern pagans, especially the core, if northern pagans had lasted long enough, do you think they would have built temples as advanced as the Greco-Roman and the later cathedrals, also the statues of the gods, goddesses as ornate? Well, we don't know if they already did, but bear in mind something, you're making an assumption here, which comes from a mindset of progress, of a linear form of history going from simple forms into increasing complexity, and that is derived from Christianity. It didn't exist in the Greco-Roman perspective or the Nordic perspective. They saw everything as having been better in the past. And you know what? The Greco-Romans built with stone because that was a good and suitable material for them to build with. But it would have been absurd, and it wouldn't have been more advanced for Nordic pagans to take the granite, of Swedish granite, and try to carve temples out of it. It would have been an enormous waste of labor, and it would have been impossible to keep warm in the winter. But what they did with an enormous amount of wood forests everywhere, and a long history going back to the Stone Age of woodworking, is built with wood. And that hasn't been preserved, obviously, but we can see from the ships and things that have been preserved and other wooden things that they were capable of extremely ornate and beautiful carvings. And even the stave churches of Norway, they are sometimes speculated to represent an architectural style that was formerly used for pagan temples. And they're extraordinarily beautiful. And they don't resemble exactly, there are some elements of it that do not resemble the churches and other parts of Northern Europe. So a lot of the missionaries to Norway were Anglo-Saxon or something, or German or whatever, but you don't see anything like those stave churches in England or Germany. So it wasn't brought there by missionaries from England or Germany. So that means a lot of these elements of Norwegian stave churches can be presumed to have been indigenous architectural styles that preceded Christianity. And they are beautiful, very, very beautiful. And I expect that and some of them also have pagan elements. There's one stave church which has on the door a carving of, I think, Sigurd and the dragon. And that there are characters from, I think there's one stave church that they had a one-eyed figure carved up of a head up at the top. So I think they were incorporating pagan designs into these churches. And that every pagan should be very interested in these stave churches because they were a transitionary architectural and artistic mode, which reveal to us some of the appearances. And they were very ornate, very beautiful, obviously influenced by Christian architecture and art as well. But you can see elements of something else in it. And would this have been developed? Of course it would have. If they remained pagan, and when other building materials came available and things changed and they're contacted with the rest of the world, they would have continued to change. Without doubt, it goes without saying. But also it should be remembered that earlier forms of Germanic paganism, like other forms, some Indo-Europeans, like the Scythians, and also even the early Vedic pagans, probably didn't actually use temples very much. Like, it seems like early Indo-Europeans didn't actually have temples, and they may not even have used gods very often. They not preferring, that's what's written in some sources discussing, Roman sources discussing the Scythians, discussing the Germans. They just prefer to use a natural enclosure. And we see similar evidence of that among the Vedic people that weren't like Hindus. While India already had religious temples before the Aryans arrived, but the Vedic people didn't seem to use temples until later. And even when they did have temples, the Vedic ritual of Agni, which you can see online if you look for the ritual of fire on YouTube, you can see an actual Vedic ritual. They construct a small wooden temple with a thatched roof, an open-sided temple for the ritual, perform the ritual, and then burn the temple down. So it's not like this big stone medieval Hindu temples we see later. So I think that we may be correct in assuming that the earliest form of Indo-European religions weren't temple-based, and that later ones became more so in some locales. But yeah. Okay. Oh, by the way, thank you for that super chat before. Chaza the Ninja says Shidan Pisse. And thank you very much for that contribution. Let me think. Oh, it's 6 o'clock. It's nearly time's up, guys, but I'll just say a little bit like why I became pagan. Like, I was thinking, I was really into paganism at first in a general sense. It wasn't like I started off with identity and then looked at Anglo-Saxon paganism. Actually, first it was like I became more increasingly aware by peculiar experiences in my life of something more than the material world. But and I wanted to learn about other forms of it besides those that I'd learned as a young Catholic. And so I was just learning about, I was in Aztec religion, ancient Roman religion, all kinds of different, like, from around the world. I wasn't trying specifically, I was interested in Polynesian, Africans, all of these different things. And then I was thinking, like, really what they have in common is that their religions are very much tied to the people. And that if I was really going to pursue this properly, I needed to look at one that was tied to my people. So it came later. That's why I didn't start off with I want an identity, so I'm going to find an English religion. I started off just thinking I want to understand how different peoples before Christianity in the world understood religion. And then after looking at ancient Egypt, ancient Rome and stuff for a bit, I was like, okay, what to make this more about me as a way that can actually incorporate it authentically into my existence, I need to make it about something that my ancestors practiced. And so that's why I started looking up Germanic paganism. I read the Eddas, I read and started just reading and reading and reading, and that led up until over the course of 3 or 4 years until I did my master's degree and then pursued it even further. Oh, one more super chat. I did, from the same guy, Chazza the Ninja. I did D&T on some Joe Rogan type shit last year and then found your videos. Epic. Wow. So maybe I've heard DMT is a death experience drug. I've never done it, but and that people taking DMT have religious experiences. But if DMT led you to STJ, then maybe Joe Rogan's right after all. I don't know. All right. Oh, I think we can wrap it up for the night, guys. I don't want to bore you all night. And thank you all for watching. I've got a pub quiz to attend, and my contributions will be valuable, providing there are some questions about Anglo-Saxon paganism and the conversion period. Otherwise, maybe not so useful. I'll do another stream next week or the week after, and I'll also be uploading my speech tomorrow from Tiverton in Somerset or Devon. Tiverton is in Western England. If you want to come and see me speak, you can find the link to the event on my Facebook page, and you can contact the event organizers about that. I look forward to seeing some of you there. See you.